Do you have the gift of gab and like talking about interesting topics? Are you often called opinionated by your friends and family? Then come to Anchor where you can be all of the above and get paid for it. Along with being one of the easiest systems to create contact with, Anchor supplies everything you need and can be used from your smartphone or computer. They even distribute your content for you so that you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. Just download the Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. Okay, hello, Internet family. This is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib, and you are listening to 31 Days of Global Feminism. So, after the last podcast, which was a pretty heavy subject, I talked about the N-wordization of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, her ex-husband. So now I want to talk about another feminist icon. I decided to go ahead and go this time with an icon. This one is a special place in my heart. She has the same name as my youngest daughter, and that is Zora Neale Hurston. So I said, the way that I'm doing things is I'm trying to do like 3 icons and then a topic. And like the last couple posts, I haven't been able to do that, and it's because of time-sensitive material that I wanted to go ahead and talk about while it was still semi-fresh in people's minds, so that so that you wouldn't be looking and go, okay, Anjanette, because one of the things I hate, there's this one channel on YouTube that I don't look at that often, and it's mainly because whenever they do post something, it's like I read about that several months ago. So one of the things that I like to do, that if I'm going to talk about current events, I try to talk about something that's relatively current, and try to keep things kind of hot off the presses if I can. I don't mind as far as talking about like old movies and past stuff, but if I'm going to talk about it, but like as far as current events, I try to strike while the iron is a little bit hot. So I wanted to go ahead and get those out the way, and I'm kind of glad I did this one in a timely manner, since Miss Anderson is now talking about making a documentary. I think it's interesting that there are a lot of famous people that are making documentaries here lately. We just got to see our girl Janet Jackson. We got to see a bit of a documentary when Wendy Williams did her biopic. The only thing, like, I like when people decide they want to tell their story, because I'm always interested. I love documentaries. For the most part, I really do love documentaries. But I think we have to, and I think we like documentaries because we feel like we're hearing the information from the horse's mouth. But you also have to remember, even amongst my favorites, and I kind of look forward to hearing this documentary now that I have seen the Pam and Tommy Lee miniseries, and hear her take. And hear her words and her story from her mouth. Because I have seen biographies and different stuff like that about Pamela Anderson and different other things that talk about her life story. So it'd be interesting to listen to her story from her lips, because she's at that level where pretty much a lot of their information is public knowledge, because of her being famous, and there being so many reports, media reports, and different things, which happens when you get really famous like that. Your life becomes a book, an open book, and many people know a lot about you based on information that's public knowledge. And it's interesting to think that strangers could know that much about you. But it's what, people say, well, it's what comes with the territory. I don't know if I want to give that much of a pass. Okay, simply because when you're talking about someone deciding, let's say, I sing and I decide I want to go into music ministry, which I do. And, along with that, you're reaching people for Christ. Yeah, Adam's Media Ministry ain't going nowhere. I could very well become famous for this. All fame means is that a lot of people like what it is you're doing. So, yeah, Adam's Rib Media Ministry is here. It lives forever. It lives on. Being famous for something, in the old days of fame, being famous for something just meant a lot of people are willing to spend money to go see you act, or to see you sing, or to see your comedy, or whatever else it is you do. Maybe you write books and people like those books. Maybe you do ministry and, many people were healed and converted to Christ because of your ministry. But, fame, becomes part of the territory. But I don't know if all of the trappings of fame are, people can say you signed up for it, you knew what you were getting into. Whenever I hear someone say that, I think about the whole Meghan and Harry thing, and how they pretty much had to, what they call Megxit, and come over to the States and be amongst people who are not royalty and everything. And I think about Harry's reasons for doing so, because he saw how the press hounded his mom and everything. I don't think that you can say, and I remember Wendy Williams making the remark about Meghan that, well, she knew what she was getting into. I don't think so. I don't think she fell in love with this man and decided to marry him. I think she kind of knew to a degree, being an actress and being famous in her own right. I don't think that she was prepared for all of what came with it. You realize when you decide to step into the public eye and marry somebody famous that you may forfeit a little bit of privacy because of the status of the person. I don't think even the fame that she had as an actress prepared her for the level of fame, for the level of public scrutiny that she would have being a princess and being married to a prince, and a real actual prince. And I don't think anybody prepared her for the London tabloids, which the London tabloids can be very, very brutal. I have seen some of them take some people apart. Man, they don't like you, look out. And that's just about it. And add to that being a woman of color and being in the public eye. Like, it's the more layers. During this month, I'm going to revisit intersectionality, which is the issue of being oppressed in more than one area. Like, the white woman can be, can have oppression based on the fact that she's not white and male. She's white, but she's not male. And it's almost like if you're anything other than white and male, let's say you're poor, well, that's still a hindrance, and it could be a level of oppression. But if you're the right color, you can work up out of it. And I can remember watching this thing on HBO where they talked about violence, and they talked about ghettos, and they talked about racism. And it was interesting. They talked about, well, why is it so hard for black people to get out of the ghetto? And I mean, if you do a whole lot of study and you have a good memory of events that have happened to black people over, first of all, I don't think it should be anybody's goal to assimilate. And much of the entrance out of poverty and out of certain things depends on one's ability to assimilate and their proximity to white spaces, unfortunately. And so, at least that's how the game has been previously played. those of us who are combating and coming against those structural hindrances are hoping to destroy the notion that you have to abandon who you are and become somebody else in order for you to prosper in this life. But like I said, the whole issue of, I don't think the whole issue of, well, you knew what you were getting into. I think it depends on how big you get and how famous you get. I done seen some people get tore apart, and it's terrible. But at the same time, I think you recognize that you're going to forfeit some things, but I don't know that you want to forfeit everything. Anyway, so today's person, so I decided to go ahead and go with a notable and go with a little bit softer, although she's been a little bit of a controversial figure for her time period, and that is Miss Zora Neale Hurston. So I remember when I was having my youngest and decided on her name, I was reading the book Disappearing Acts by Terry McMillan. And in the book Disappearing Acts, there's a character named Zora. And I thought that would be a nice name for a little girl. And so, of course, the character is named after Miss Hurston. So I went ahead and I named my daughter Zora. Many people that are very, very bookish and love books have a tendency to like the name Zora for a girl. And so I decided to name her Zora, and not realizing that she has the same birthday as Miss Hurston. Right, so Miss Hurston is not only my daughter's name twin, but she is also her birthday twin. And my daughter found this out. She went to school, and she came back and she said, "Mommy." And I said, "What?" She said, "I'm named after somebody important." I said, "Yeah, Zora Neale Hurston." She said, "Yes. Did you do that on purpose?" She said, "I have." She said, "My teacher told me that there is a famous black author, a famous black lady that has my name." And so I was like, "Yes." And so I showed her, went and looked up online and showed her and everything. And so she was like, "And she has my birthday too." So she, because at first when little girls get names that are different, it can be, I've gone around with the name Anjanette for 55 years, so I know what it's like to have a name that isn't Sally or Susie or, Lisa, a common name or a common, quote, white name. And so when you have a different name, it can be difficult. It's hard to find monogram jewelry. It's hard to find anything that has your name on it. And so more jewelers are getting more sensitive to those of us girls those of us people, period, that have different names and so and have uncommon names. And so I used to wonder, I'm like, did you hate your name? She said, I had a problem with it. And she said, but once she found out she was named after a famous author, it gave her a sense of pride to know that somebody that, is still as relevant as Miss Hurston is, then they share the same name and the same birthday. So, and I didn't even know they had the same birthday until recently. So I was like, oh, y'all got the same birthday too? So this particular podcast, this particular recording is going to be a little bit, this particular icon is a little special to me for that reason. So Miss Zora Neale Hurston was born January 7th, 1891, and lived until January 28th, 1960. So she died the same month that she was born. That's interesting. So she was an American author, anthropologist, and filmmaker. She portrayed racial struggles in the early 1900s American South and published research on hoodoo. So hoodoo is a set of spiritual practices, traditions, and belief which was created and concealed from slaveholders by enslaved Africans in North America. Hoodoo evolved from various traditional African religions and practices in the American South incorporated various elements of indigenous botanical knowledge. Hoodoo is an African diaspora tradition created during the time of slavery in the United States and is an esoteric system of African American occultism. Many of the practices are similar to other African diaspora traditions as the practices come from the Bak Congo people in Central Africa. So, and you can read the rest of it courtesy of Wikipedia. Okay. The most popular of her four novels is Their Eyes Were Watching God, and many of us remember it. I remember reading the book, but many of us remember watching it when it was a TV movie starring Halle Berry, published in 1937. She also wrote more than 50 short stories, plays, and essays. So she was born in Notasulga, Alabama, and when she died in Fort Pierce, Florida. So Miss Hurston, as I noted just a minute ago, was born in Notasulga, Alabama, and moved with her family to Eatonville, Florida. In 1894, she later used Eatonville in many of her as the setting for many of her stories. In her early career, she conducted anthropological and ethnographic research while a student at Barnard College and Columbia University. She had an interest in African American and Caribbean folklore and how these contributed to the community's identity. So I'm one of those people, I'm at the place in my life where I want to go deeper in what I know about my traditions. I know a few people. It's not enough for me to, not just to know all what ethnicities have gone into me, but also to know the type of black that I am. Like, am I a black person that heralds from the Bahamas, from Jamaica, from Caribbean? Or am I, like, West African? And if so, what tribe? So I'm seeing these people doing these DNA tests where you can find out exactly what kind of black you are, or what all ethnic blood is coursing through your veins. And I'm thinking about trying one of those to see exactly what it is like to know where what your roots actually are. So and I think it is important to find out exactly how these traditions contribute to the black community. Miss Hurston also wrote fiction about contemporary issues in the black community, and was a central and became a central figure in the Harlem Renaissance. So you remember the last live broadcast I did with Station Head, I talked about black exploitation, and I talked about whether or not black exploitation was black renaissance, should have been more appropriately labeled as black renaissance. And one of the reasons I asked that is because of the influence that black exploitation has had and still continues to have. So the Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual and cultural revival of African American music, dance, art, fashion, literature, theater, politics, and scholarship that was centered in Harlem, Manhattan, New York City, and it spanned from the 1920s and during the 1920s and 30s. At this time, it was also known as the New Negro Moment, named after the New Negro, a 1925 anthology edited by Alan Locke. The movement also included the new African American cultural expressions across the urban areas in the Northwest and Midwest United States, and was affected by a renewed militancy in the central struggle for civil rights. So, combined with the Great Migration of African American workers fleeing the racist conditions of the Jim Crow Deep South. The Great Migration. I'm going to go ahead because these are two topics that I wouldn't mind speaking on. The New Negro. So her short satires, drawing from the African American experience and racial division, were published in anthologies such as The New Negro and Fire. Okay. So Fire was an African American literary magazine published in New York City in 1926 during the Harlem Renaissance. The publication was started by Wallace Thurman, Miss Zora Neale Hurston, Aaron Douglas, John P. Davis, Richard Bruce Nugent, Gwendolyn Bennett, Louis Alexander, County Cullen, and Langston Hughes. The magazine's title referred to burning up old ideas, and Fire challenged the norms of the older black generation while featuring younger artists. The publishers promoted a realistic style with vernacular and language and controversial topics such as homosexuality and prostitution. So I may wind up doing one on them, not too far from now, sometime this month, and their contribution to feminism. So after moving back to Florida, Hurston wrote and published her literary anthology on African American folklore in North Florida, Mules and Men, and her first three novels, Jonas Gourdvine, Their Eyes Were Watching God, and Moses, Man on the Mountain, also published during this time. Was Tell My Horse, Voodoo and Life in Haiti and Jamaica, documenting her research on rituals in Jamaica and Haiti. Ms. Hurston's works concern both the African American experience and her struggles as an African American woman. Her novels went relatively unrecognized by the literary world for decades. Interest was revived in 1975 after author Alice Walker published an article in search of Zora Neale Hurston in the March issue of Ms. Magazine that year. Hurston's manuscript, Every Tongue Got to Confess, a collection of folk tales gathered in the 20s and was published posthumously in 2001 after being discovered in the Smithsonian Archives. Her nonfiction book, Barracoon, The Story of the Last Black Cargo, about the life of Cujo Lewis, was published posthumously in 2018. So Cujo Lewis was the third to last and last known adult survivor of the Atlantic slave trade between Africa and the United States. Together with 115 other African captives, he was brought to the United States on board the ship Clotilda. The captives were landed in backwaters of the Mobile River near Mobile, Alabama, and hidden from authorities. The ship was scuttled to evade discovery and later remained undiscovered until January 2018. Wow. After the Civil War and emancipation, Lewis and other members of the Clotilda group became free. A number of them founded a community at Magazine Point, north of Mobile, Alabama. They were joined there by others born in Africa. Now designated as the Africa Town Historic District, the community was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Hmm. I tell you what, if you're doing any traveling this summer, this to bring back any type of travel for the post pandemic, it looks like we're starting to get a little freer. Um, Once we start being able to travel again, some of these places would be interesting to visit. So, Miss Hurston was the fifth of eight children from John Hurston and Lucy Ann Hurston, formerly Potts. All of her four grandparents had been born into slavery. Her father was a Baptist preacher and sharecropper who later became a carpenter, and her mother was a school teacher. She was, we already covered where she was, her birthplace, and her father grew up there, and her paternal grandfather was the preacher of a Baptist church. When she was 3, the family moved to Eatonville, Florida. In 1887, it was one of the first all black towns incorporated in the United States. Miss Hurston said that Eatonville was home to her as she was so young when she moved there. Sometimes she claimed it as her birthplace. A few years later, her father was elected as mayor of the town in 1897. In 1902, he was called to serve as minister of his largest church, Macedonia Missionary Baptist. As an adult, Miss Hurston often used Eatonville as a setting place in her stories. It was a place where African Americans could live as they desired, independent of white society. In 1901, some northern school teachers had visited Eatonville and given Hurston several books that opened her mind to literature. She later described this personal literary awakening as a kind of birth. I can attest to that. Miss Hurston lived the rest of her childhood in Eatonville and described the experience of growing up there in her 1928 essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. Eatonville now holds an annual Zora festival in her honor. Her mother died in 1904, and her father subsequently married Mattie Moog in 1901. This was considered scandalous, as it was rumored that he had sexual relations before Miss Moog he had sexual relations with Miss Moog before his first wife's death. Hurston's father and stepmother sent her to a Baptist boarding school in Jacksonville, Florida. They eventually stopped paying her tuition, and she was dismissed. In 1916, Miss Hurst was employed as a maid by the lead singer of the Gilbert and Sullivan Theatrical Company. In 1917, she resumed her formal education, attending Morgan College, the high school division of Morgan State University, a historically black college in Baltimore, Maryland. At this time, apparently to qualify for a free high school education, the 26-year-old Hurston began claiming 1901 as her year of birth. She graduated from the high school of Morgan State University in 1918. Okay, her college years. When she was in college, she was introduced to viewing life through an anthropological lens away from Eatonville. One of her main goals was to prove similarity between ethnicities. In 1918, Miss Hurston began her studies at Howard University, another historically black college in Washington, D.C. She was one of the earliest initiates of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, founded by and for black women, and co founded the Hilltop, the university student paper. She took courses in Spanish, English, Greek, and public speaking, and earned an associate degree in 1920. In 1921, she wrote a short story, John Redding Goes to Sea, which qualified her to become a member of Alan Locke's literary club, The Stylist. Miss Hurston left Howard in 1925 and was offered a scholarship by Barnard trustee Ann Nathan Meyer. They just giving me more people to talk about this month. So she was given the scholarship by Annie Nathan Meyer to Barnard College of Columbia University. This is a women's college where she was the sole. This was a women's college where she was the sole black student. While she was at Barnard, she conducted ethnographic research with noted anthropologist Franz Boas of Columbia University, and later studied with him as a grad student. So, ethnographic research is a branch of anthropology and the systematic study of individual cultures. Ethnography explores cultural phenomena from the point of view of the subject of the study. Ethnography is also a type of social research that involves examining the behavior of the participants in a given social situation and understanding the group members' own interpretation of such behavior. She also worked with Ruth Benedict and fellow anthropology student Margaret Mead. She received her BA in anthropology in 1928 when she was 37. Um, Hurston met Charlotte Osgood Mason, a philanthropist and literary patron who became interested in her work and career. She had supported other African American authors such as Langston Hughes and Alan Locke, who had recommended Hurston to her, but she also tried to direct their work. Mason supported Hurston's travel to the South for research from 1928 to 1932 with a stipend of $200 per month. In return, she wanted Hurston to give her all the material she collected about Negro music, folklore, literature, hoodoo, and other forms of culture. At the same time, Hurston had to try to satisfy Boas as her academic advisor, who was a cultural relativist and wanted to overturn ideas ranking cultures in a hierarchy of values. After graduating from Barnard, Miss Hurston studied for 2 years as a graduate student in anthropology at Columbia University, working further with Boas during this period. Living in Harlem in the 20s, Miss Hurston had befriended poets Langston Hughes and County Cullen, amongst several other authors. Her apartment, according to some accounts, was a popular spot for social gatherings. Around this time, Miss Hurston also had a few literary successes, including placing in short story and playwriting contests. An Opportunity, a journal of Negro life published by the National Urban League. Hurston was one of the first initiates of, we discussed the Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, a sorority founded in 1920 by and for black women. She pledged the sorority's Alpha chapter as a student in Howard University. So Miss Hurston was married several times. In 1927, she was married to Herbert Sheen, a jazz musician and a former teacher at Howard. He later became a musician. Their marriage ended in 1931. In 1935, Hurston was involved with Perry Punter, a graduate student at Columbia University. He inspired the character Tea Cake in Their Eyes Were Watching God. In 1939, she was working for the WPA in Florida. I'm going to pause this for just a moment. Okay, I had to mute my mic for a minute because I had to handle something. The marriage ended after a few months. But they did not divorce until 1943. The following year, Miss Hurston married James Howell Pitts of Cleveland. That marriage, too, lasted less than a year. Miss Hurston twice lived in a college in Old Gailey, Florida in 1929 and again in 1951. Patron support. When foundational grants ended during the Great Depression, Miss Hurston and her friend Langston Hughes both relied on the patronage of philanthropist Charlotte Osgood Mason, a white literary patron. During the 1930s, Miss Hurston was a resident of Westfield, New Jersey, a suburb of New York where her friend Hughes was amongst her neighbors. Okay. In 1934, Miss Hurst established a School of Dramatic Arts based on pure Negro expression at Bethune-Cookman University, at the time Bethune-Cookman College, a historically black college in Dayton Beach, Florida. In 1956, Miss Hurston received the Bethune-Cookman College Reward for Education in Human Relations in recognition of her achievements. The English department at Bethune-Cookman College remains dedicated to preserving her cultural legacy. In later life, in addition to continuing her literary career, Miss Hurston served on the faculty of North Carolina College for Negroes, now North Carolina Central University in Durham. So now I'm gonna mute my mic for a minute here because I have something to handle, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about her anthropological and folkloric fieldwork. Okay, so to talk about her anthropological and folklore fieldwork, Miss Hurston traveled extensively in the Caribbean and the American South and immersed herself in local practices to conduct her anthropological research. Based on her work in the South, sponsored from 1928 to 1932 by Charlotte Mason, a wealthy philanthropist, Hurston wrote Mules and Men in 1935. She was researching lumber camps in North Florida and commented on the practice of white men in power taking black women as sexual concubines, including having them bear children. This practice later was referred to as paramour rights. Okay, which I, of course, don't believe in. So when I click on paramour rights in the Wikipedia page that I'm looking at, it takes me right over to sexual slavery. So this was based on the men's power under racial segregation and related to practices during slavery times. The book also includes much folklore. I'm going to have to look this up. One thing that I hate, absolutely hate, and despise is when I hear, I finally had to say it recently because of some things I was going through with a church. And like I said before, cults love interracial dating, and they love interracial dating and marriage because it is an attempt to help their image. Okay, if I can look all embracing and all, oh, we just love everyone and everyone is welcome here. Bless you, Jesus. Okay, but it really is a fraud. It really is, and in some cases, a front for human trafficking. Okay, and so when I one of the situations I hate to hear romanticized is when I hear a white person go, "Oh, you know, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings." I finally had to say and break my piece and go, if I hear one more white person romanticize that situation, I'm going to scream. You do realize she was property. You know, you can't say that that was consensual because you weren't there. You don't know. She had no power in the situation because she was his property. Okay? And according to some reports, she wasn't even very old when the relationship started. Okay, so we looked at that now, he would look like a big old pedophile. Okay, so to come forward, so to keep romanticizing that situation, and that's one of the things that I get a little tired of. Just like with these so-called maggots, MAGA people or whatever, make America great again, and I'm like, please stop fantasizing or romanticizing past historical events that really only serve to oppress people of color and women, because there's nothing romantic about that. Okay, so, and this is like the third time that I have dug back in the whole feminist movement, and like I said, when we're talking about feminism and the fight for equal rights, you have to recognize that while there are a lot of similarities amongst cultural diagrams, paradigms maybe is the word I might be looking for. But while we all have similarities, there are also very, very nuanced differences, because we are fighting this battle from a lot of different lenses and stances. So what may sound like freedom to one person may be oppressive to another person. May be oppressive to another person. Okay. So the book also includes much folklore. Miss Hurston drew from this material, as well as the fictional treatment she developed for her novels, such as Jonah's Gourdvine. In 1935, Miss Hurston traveled to Georgia with Alan Lomax and Mary Elizabeth Barnacle for research on African American song traditions and the relationship to slave and American antecedent music. She was tasked with selecting the geographical eras and contacting the research subjects. In 1936 and 1937, Miss Hurston traveled to Jamaica and Haiti for research and with support from the Guggenheim Foundation. She drew from this research for her anthropological work, Tell My Horse. In 1938 and 39, Miss Hurston worked for the Federal Writers Project, part of the Works Progress Administration, hired for her experience as a writer and folklorist. She gathered information to add as Florida's historical and cultural collection. From October 1947 to February 1948, Miss Hurston lived in Honduras. In Honduras, in the north coastal town of Puerto Cortez. She had some hopes of relocating either Mayan ruins or vestiges as yet undiscovered in civilization. While in Puerto Cortez, she wrote much of Seraph on the Swanee, set in Florida. Hurston expressed interest in the polyethnic nature of the population in the region. Many, such as the Mosquito, Zambu, and Garifuna, were of partial African ancestry and had later developed Creole cultures. That's interesting. During her last decade, Miss Hurston worked as a freelance writer for magazines and newspapers. In the fall of 1952, she was contacted by Sam Nunn, editor of the Pittsburgh Courier, to go to Florida to cover the murder trial of Ruby McCollum. McCollum was charged with murdering the white Dr. C. Leroy Adams, who was also a politician. McCollum said he had forced her to have sex with him and bear his child. Miss Hurston recalled what she had seen of white male sexual dominance in the lumber camps in North Florida and discussed it with Nunn. They both thought the case might be about such paramour rights and wanted to expose it to a national audience. While reaching Live Oak, Hurston was surprised not to only be not only by the gag order the judge in the trial placed on the defense, but her inability to get residents in town to talk about the case. Both blacks and whites were silent. She believed that might have been related to Dr. Adams' alleged involvement in the gambling operation of Ruby's husband, Sam McCollum. Her articles were published by the newspaper during the trial. Ruby McCollum was convicted by an all-male, all-white jury. And there's a link here. Racial discrimination in jury selection. And was sentenced to death. Miss Hurston had a special assignment to write a serialized account, the life story of Ruby McCollum over 3 months in 1953. In the paper, her part ended abruptly when she and Nunn disagreed about her pay, and she left. Unable to pay independently to return for the appeal and second trial, Ms. Hurston contacted journalist William Bradford Huey, with whom she had worked at the American Mercury, to try to interest him in the case. He covered the appeal and second trial and also developed material from a background investigation. Ms. Hurst shared her material with him from the first trial, but he acknowledged her only briefly in his book, Ruby McCollum, Woman in the Swanee Jail, which became a bestseller. Ms. Hurston celebrated that amongst other positions, Ms. Hurston later celebrated that. Okay. So McCollum's testimony in her own defense marked the first time that of a woman of African American descent was allowed to testify as to the paternity of her child by a white man. Hurston firmly believed that Ruby McCollum's testimony sounded the death toll on Paramour rights in the segregationist South. Amongst other positions, that was a quote from Mr. Huey. So amongst other positions, Hurston worked at the Pan American World Airways Library at Patrick Air Force Base. Lord have mercy. In 1957, she was fired for being too well educated for her job. She moved to Fort Pierce, Florida, taking jobs where she could find them. Miss Hurston worked occasionally as a substitute teacher. At 60, she had to fight to make ends meet with the help of public assistance. At one point, she worked as a maid in Miami Beach's Revo Alto Island. So here's some details about her death. During a period of financial and medical difficulties, Ms. Hurston was forced to enter St. Lucie, California welfare home, where she suffered a stroke. She died of hypertensive heart disease January 28, 1960, and was buried at the Garden of Heavenly Rest in Fort Pierce, Florida. Her remains were in an unmarked grave until 1973. Novelist Alice Walker and fellow Hurston scholar Charlotte D. Hunt found an unmarked grave in the general area where Hurston had been buried. They decided to mark it as hers. Alice Walker commissioned a grave marker inscribed with Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South, novelist, folklorist, anthropologist, 1901 to 1960. The line, a genius from the South, is from Gene Toomer's poem, Georgia Dusk, which appears in his book, Cain. Hurston was born in 1891, not 1901. After Miss Hurston died, her papers were ordered to be burned. Oh my God. A law officer and friend, Patrick Duval, passing by the house where she lived, stopped and put out the fire, thus saving an invaluable collection of literary documents for posterity. The nucleus of this collection was given to the University of Florida libraries in 1961 by Miss Marjorie Silver, a friend and neighbor of Hurston. Other materials were donated in 1970 and 1971 by Frances Grover, daughter of E.O. Grover, a Rollins College professor and longtime friend of Miss Hurston's. In 1979, Stetson Kennedy of Jacksonville, who knew Hurston through his work with the Federal Writers Project, added additional papers. Zora Neale Hurston Papers, University of Florida Smathers Library, August 2008. So I'm not going to go through the literary career because we pretty much have that. If you would like to look at that information, it would be like I said, just about everything else that I'm reading here, courtesy of Wikipedia. Her politics. This is interesting. She was a Republican who was generally sympathetic to the foreign policy, not interventionalism of the old right, and a fan of Booker T. Washington. Self-help politics. She disagreed with the philosophies, including communism and the New Deal, supported by many of her colleagues in the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, if you want to read the rest about her politics, you can read that under the politics section. So criticism. Let me see here. So Darwin Turner, an English professor and specialist in African American literature, faulted Hurston in 1971 for opposing integration and for opposing programs to guarantee blacks the right to work. Even though criticized, she appeared to oppose integration based on pride and her sense of independence. She would not bow low before the white man and claimed adequate Negro schools already existed in 1955. Ms. Hurston is described as a trailblazer for black women's empowerment because of her numerous individual achievements and her strong belief that black women could be self-made. However, a common criticism of her work is that the vagueness of her racial politics in her writing, particularly about black feminism, makes her a prime candidate for white intellectual idolatry. Oof. So, like I said, those criticisms are available via Wikipedia. So, I'm going to go ahead and get she kind of was one of my favorite authors. You have to recognize that calling her a Republican back then, you would have to do even further research on her background. There are several controversies involving her, but she was definitely known as a feminist trailblazer for the work that she was able to do. Like a lot of our heroes, she, has had her own share of stuff that she's had to overcome. So, like I said, like the Pam and Tommy Lee podcast that I did earlier, this podcast will be available probably within about 15 minutes on the platforms that I named a little bit earlier. So this is my second one for today and everything. So I'm going to get this done. It'll be up. I'm trying to get everything together and get it over there on YouTube. My app has been giving me problems. I've had some technological difficulties here with some of my video making equipment. So I'm going to go ahead and get off here. I'm not going to be before you long. This took a little bit longer than I thought it would, but it's actually just the right amount of time. So I will be back up and podcasting tomorrow with two I would say two more. I'm gonna try to make tomorrow's two notables. And then, let me see, tomorrow's Wednesday. Tomorrow will be two notables, and then Thursday will be a notable and a topic. So I will be, this is me blowing you a kiss, and I will be back. I will see you at the next podcast. You guys have a good one. Hello, you have reached the message line for Adam's Rib Media Ministry. If you would like to give me a shout out, recommend some topics for discussion, or give an opinion about some topics that I've already discussed, either here on my podcast or on my blogs, leave me a message and I will get right back to you. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.